Hi there, I'm Sarah Mitchell. And let me tell you, nothing prepares you for seeing your husband of 12 years hold hands with his assistant across a hospital cafeteria table while you're sitting 3 tables away with a chemotherapy port still, fresh in your chest. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was years of shared dreams suddenly evaporating, the business we built together slipping from my grasp, and the cruelly timed abandonment when I needed support most. But the worst part? They didn't just take my present, they tried to erase my future entirely. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. You think that's bad? Wait until you hear how far they went, before I finally showed them exactly who they were dealing with. The morning had that particular kind of brightness that only happens in Denver during early autumn. Crisp mountain air, golden sunlight filtering through changing leaves, the kind of perfect day that makes you believe anything is possible. I was standing in our penthouse bathroom, my hand gripping the marble countertop so hard my knuckles turned white, staring at the doctor's number on my phone screen. I needed to call back to schedule the follow-up appointment after yesterday's biopsy, but my fingers wouldn't move. My name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm 38 years old, and that morning was supposed to be like any other. Reviewing client proposals for Mitchell Consulting Group, the boutique management firm my husband James and I had built from nothing over the last decade. We were respected in our industry, known for innovative approaches to corporate restructuring that preserve jobs while increasing profitability. Our client list included some of Colorado's fastest-growing tech companies. For years, we'd been partners in every sense, professionally, romantically, in our dreams for the future. "We're building something that will outlast us," James would say, his eyes bright with ambition. "Something we can pass down someday." I believed him. I shaped every decision around that shared vision. When I finally made that call, the doctor's voice was gentle but direct. Stage 3 breast cancer, aggressive. Treatment needed to begin immediately. I stood frozen, my reflection in the mirror suddenly unfamiliar. The woman staring back looked like me, but with something new in her eyes. Fear I'd never allowed myself to show before. I waited until dinner to tell James, preparing his favorite meal, pouring the special reserve Cabernet we'd been saving. I wanted to create a moment of normalcy before everything changed. He arrived home late, already loosening his tie, distracted by his phone. "Sorry, crazy day. Rachel stayed late too. We're finalizing the Apex proposal," he said, naming his executive assistant of 2 years. I nodded, placing the wine in front of him. She was good at her job, efficient, detail-oriented, always anticipating his needs. At 31, she was eager and ambitious. I'd been the one to hire her. "James," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "I got my results back." He looked up then, his attention finally shifting from his phone. I watched his expression change as I told him, shock, fear, grief passing across his face like storm clouds. He held me that night as I cried, promised we'd face it together. "For better or worse," he whispered into my hair, "in sickness and in health." I believed him. That was my first mistake. The next few weeks passed in a blur of doctor appointments, treatment plans, and work arrangements. I decided to step back from day-to-day operations but remain involved in major decisions. James supported this publicly, helped announce the temporary leadership structure to our staff of 28. Rachel would take on more responsibility, coordinating between me and the office. The irony of that arrangement still burns. The first chemo session hit me harder than I'd expected. The nausea was relentless, fatigue unlike anything I'd experienced. James was there, holding my hand through the worst of it. But by the third session, something had shifted. He was physically present but mentally elsewhere, constantly checking his phone, making excuses to step out for calls. "The company needs me, Sarah," he'd say when I mentioned it. Someone has to keep things running. While you focus on getting better, I told myself it was the stress, that he was carrying both our burdens. That was my second mistake. 8 weeks into my treatment, I decided to surprise James by visiting the office. My oncologist had mentioned staying connected to normal life, when possible, and I missed our team. I missed feeling like myself. I wore a silk scarf over my thinning hair, applied makeup carefully to my pale face, and chose an outfit that hid how much weight I'd lost. The office felt simultaneously familiar and foreign. People seemed genuinely happy to see me, but there was something underneath their smiles, an awkwardness, glances exchanged when they thought I wouldn't notice. Lisa, our HR director who'd been with us since the beginning, hugged me too tightly. "You should have called ahead," she said, her voice carrying a weight I couldn't interpret. "I wanted to surprise everyone," I replied. "Is James in a meeting?" Another loaded glance. He and Rachel took the Westlake clients to lunch at Barolo's, our special occasion restaurant, the place we'd celebrated landing our first major client, where James had given me a bracelet on our 10th anniversary just 6 months earlier. "Of course," I said, keeping my smile intact. "I'll catch up with them another time." I spent an hour reconnecting with the team, reviewing some reports, pretending everything was normal. But as I was leaving, I found myself drawn to James's office. It looked different, rearranged somehow. His desk, once cluttered with our shared mementos, was minimal and organized. The photo of us from our trip to Santorini was missing. In its place stood a sleek modern sculpture I'd never seen before. And there, on his desk calendar, was a dinner reservation noted for that evening. Not with a client, not with me. Just dinner, 8 p.m. The unease that had been building crystallized into something sharper, something I couldn't ignore. That evening, instead of confronting him immediately, I watched. Observed how he came home at 10:30, smelling of unfamiliar perfume. How he claimed the Westlake dinner ran long. How he kissed my forehead, not my lips, before heading to shower. I waited until the weekend, gathered my strength for what I knew would be a difficult conversation. "Is there something you need to tell me about Rachel?" I asked directly, watching his face for the truth. The denial was immediate, practiced. "She's been invaluable at the office, that's all." "James," I said quietly, "don't insult me by lying. Not now." His expression shifted, defensiveness replacing guilt. "What do you expect, Sarah? Everything has been about your cancer for months. The business needs attention. He trailed off, but I finished for him. "You need someone who isn't sick, someone who doesn't remind you of mortality." When he didn't deny it, the last thread of what I thought we were broke silently between us. 2 days later, I found myself in that hospital cafeteria. I'd gone alone to my treatment, telling James I preferred it that way. The truth was, I couldn't bear his performative support anymore. After the session, weak and nauseated, I'd stopped for tea before calling a rideshare home. And there they were. James and Rachel, their heads close together, hands intertwined on the table, not even attempting to hide. In the same hospital where I was fighting for my life. I didn't confront them. I simply watched as they laughed. As he tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the same gesture he'd used with me countless times. I observed how young she looked, how healthy, how alive. Everything I feared I might never be again. That night, James came home with divorce papers. "I think we both know this isn't working anymore," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. "The stress of everything. It's changed us, changed what we want." "What about what we built?" I asked, my voice hollow. "The firm? Our shared dream?" "You need to focus on your health, Sarah," he said, his tone reasonable, concerned even, as if this betrayal were actually for my benefit. "I'll buy out your share. A clean break is better for everyone." The buyout offer was insultingly low, less than half of what my stake was worth. His lawyer claimed the company's value had diminished significantly during my absence, that future projections were uncertain. They were banking on my exhaustion, on my desire to avoid conflict during treatment. They were wrong about who they were dealing with. I signed the personal divorce papers. I didn't fight for the house, the art collection, even the dog we'd raised from a puppy. But the business papers? Those I set aside. I need time to review these with my own attorney, I told him. James frowned, impatience flickering across his face. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. There's nothing to review, Sarah. It's a generous offer considering the circumstances. The circumstances, as if my cancer were a business liability rather than a life-threatening illness. As if our marriage had been merely a contractual arrangement. He could terminate when it became inconvenient. Nevertheless, I said, meeting his gaze steadily, I'll have my lawyer contact yours. That was the moment something shifted inside me. Not just grief or anger, but a cold, clear purpose. If I survived this, and suddenly I was determined that I wouldn't just recover my health. I would reclaim everything that was rightfully mine, and more. Little did James know, this wasn't the end of our story. It was merely the beginning of mine. The day after James moved out, taking only his personal belongings as if the rest of our shared life were too contaminated to touch, I made 2 phone calls. The first was to Diane Lowell, the top business attorney in Denver, known for her strategic brilliance and uncompromising approach. The second was to my oncologist, requesting a different chemo protocol, one with a better long-term success rate, even if it meant harder short-term side effects. Are you sure? Dr. Chen asked. The more aggressive treatment is significantly more difficult to tolerate. I'm sure, I replied. I need to be around for a long time. I have unfinished business. Surviving cancer and fighting for your business while your ex-husband parades around town with his new girlfriend requires a particular kind of compartmentalization. I devoted mornings to treatment and recovery, afternoons to legal strategy and investigation, and sleepless nights to planning my future. A future James had tried to steal from me. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Diane was brutally honest during our first meeting at her downtown office. The mountains, visible through floor-to-ceiling windows. Your ex-husband is counting on your illness to weaken your position, she said, reviewing the buyout offer. This valuation is criminally low, but proving it while you're in active treatment will be challenging. I leaned forward, wincing at the pull of my chemo port. I don't just want fair value, Diane. I want control of the company. Her eyebrows rose, the first crack in her professional demeanor. That's ambitious. So was building it from scratch while everyone said we were too young and inexperienced, I replied. I've done impossible things before. Over the next several weeks, as poison dripped into my veins to kill the cancer, Diane and I developed our strategy. She connected me with Sam Torres, a forensic accountant who specialized in business valuations and detecting financial irregularities. Record everything, Sam advised during our first Zoom call, my bald head covered with a soft cap I didn't bother removing. Every conversation, every email, and get me access to any financial records you still have. I was already one step ahead. Before signing the divorce papers, I'd downloaded every document I could access. Client contracts, financial statements, strategic plans. Not for revenge, but for protection. That foresight was about to pay off. Sam didn't take long to uncover the first red flag. They've been diverting potential clients to a new shell company, he explained, pointing to suspicious patterns in our client acquisition numbers. High-value prospects suddenly disappearing from your pipeline only to reappear months later as clients of Summit Strategies, a company registered just 3 months ago. The name on the incorporation documents? Rachel Wilson. They're siphoning off business to artificially depress Mitchell Consulting's value, Diane confirmed. Classic corporate theft, but we need more to build a solid case. That night, as side effects left me shaking and sweating through my sheets, a memory surfaced. 2 years ago, James had insisted we include a specific clause in our operating agreement. If either of us engaged in provable business misconduct, the other partner could trigger a forced buyout at a predetermined formula significantly below market rate. It protects us both, he'd said. Ensures neither of us can damage what we've built. The irony was almost beautiful. The very clause he'd created could be his undoing, if I could prove the misconduct conclusively. I needed an ally inside. The firm. Someone with access. Someone James wouldn't suspect. My mind went to Kevin Matthews, our quiet, methodical head of research. Kevin had been one of my hires 5 years ago, plucked from a larger firm where his talents were underutilized. He'd always been grateful for the opportunity, loyal to the company rather than to either James or me specifically. Reaching out was risky. If he reported our conversation to James, it could compromise everything. But cancer teaches you about calculated risks. Sometimes they're necessary for survival. We met at a small coffee shop far from the office, where I sat in the corner, wearing a scarf and dark sunglasses despite the overcast day. Kevin recognized me immediately despite my changed appearance, his expression shifting from shock to concern to something harder to read. He sat across from me, hands wrapped around his cup. "I heard you were doing better," he said carefully. "People hear what they're meant to hear," I replied. "Kevin, I need to ask you something, and I need absolute honesty. Have there been changes at the firm that seem unusual to you?" He glanced around before leaning in. "Beyond Rachel moving? Into your office within a week of your diagnosis? Or the fact that we've mysteriously lost half our contract research staff with no replacements hired? Or perhaps the new policy that all client communications go through either James or Rachel first?" My heart sank and soared simultaneously. The situation was worse than I'd thought, but I'd found my ally. "They're dismantling everything we built," I said quietly. Kevin nodded. "Not everything. Just the parts with your fingerprints on them. The client relationship model, the ethical review process for potential clients, the profit-sharing structure for employees. All gone." "Why? Haven't you left?" I asked. His eyes met mine, steady and clear. "Because someone needs to be there when you come back." I didn't correct his assumption. Instead, I asked for his help. Discrete documentation of the changes, copies of redirected client communications, evidence of the systematic dismantling of my contributions. "It could cost you your job," I warned. Kevin smiled slightly. "With what they're doing to the company? That job has an expiration date anyway." Over the next month, as my treatment continued and my strength gradually returned, Kevin became my eyes and ears inside Mitchell Consulting. Each piece of evidence he provided was another brick in the foundation of my case, a case I wasn't yet sure how I would use, but that gave me purpose beyond mere survival. Meanwhile, James seemed to be thriving. Denver Business Journal ran a profile on him, "The Visionary Reshaping Management Consulting," with a sidebar mentioning his personal assistant turned business partner, Rachel Wilson. The article detailed their innovative new direction for the firm, including expanded services that sounded suspiciously like ideas I'd proposed last year, ideas James had dismissed as too ambitious. There was no mention of me, no acknowledgement. That Mitchell Consulting Group had been co-founded and co-led by Sarah Mitchell for a decade. It was as if I'd been erased from my own company's history. That same week, I received another settlement offer from James's lawyer. Slightly higher than before, but still insultingly inadequate. with a 48-hour deadline for acceptance. "They're getting nervous," Diane observed when I forwarded it to her. "They know you haven't signed yet, and they're trying to force closure." "Let them sweat," I replied. "We're not done building our case." The turning point came unexpectedly. Lisa, our HR director, reached out through a personal email account, asking to meet privately. We'd been friendly during my time at the company, but never close outside of work. Her message was cryptic. "There are things you should know, things I can't ignore anymore." We met at her apartment, away from potentially watchful eyes. Lisa looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, hair pulled back severely. "I should have come to you sooner," she began without preamble. "But I was afraid for my job, and honestly, I didn't think you were well enough to deal with this." "Deal with what?" She pulled out a folder. "Rachel accessed your personal email through the company server. She's been monitoring your communications, including with your attorney." My blood ran cold. "That's illegal." "It gets worse," Lisa continued. "They're approaching our biggest clients, telling them you've permanently left the business due to health concerns, suggesting you might not." She hesitated. "Suggesting I might not survive," I finished for her. She nodded miserably. "They're using your illness to consolidate control, making it seem like James is heroically saving the company from uncertainty. Why are you telling me this now?" Lisa's eyes hardened. "Because yesterday I was instructed to remove all mentions of you as co-founder from our company materials. They're literally erasing you, Sarah, and I watched my mother die of breast cancer when I was 15. I know what you're fighting. What they're doing. It's monstrous." She handed me the folder, internal memos, email printouts, screenshots of calendar invitations to transition meetings with key clients. The final page was a draft of a company-wide announcement naming Rachel as the new chief operating officer, with language suggesting the role had been created to fill the void left by Sarah's unfortunate departure. "They're planning to announce this next week," Lisa said. "I thought you deserved to know." As she left, she paused at the door. "For what it's worth, many of us miss your leadership. The company doesn't feel right without you." That night, I couldn't sleep, not from pain or nausea for once, but from a clarity so bright it was almost blinding. I'd been fighting to get back what was taken from me, my fair share of the company, my acknowledgement as co-founder. But that wasn't enough anymore. James and Rachel hadn't just betrayed me personally. They'd betrayed the company itself, the employees who depended on it, the vision it was built upon. They didn't deserve to lead it. They didn't deserve to profit from it. I called Diane at an unreasonable hour. To her credit, she answered. "I don't want a settlement," I told her without preamble. "I want the whole company." There was a long pause before she responded. "Then we need to change our approach entirely." The next morning, I met with Diane and Sam in her office. My appearance had changed. My hair was beginning to grow back, in soft patches, and I'd gained back some weight. More importantly, my latest scans showed the cancer was responding to treatment. I was getting stronger, just as my case was. "We have enough to file a lawsuit," Diane confirmed. "But lawsuits are messy, public, and drain resources on both sides. The company could be irreparably damaged in the process." "There's another option," Sam interjected, spinning his laptop toward me. "Mitchell Consulting has taken on significant debt in the last 6 months, approximately $1 million in new loans." I frowned. That makes no sense. Our model has always been conservative with debt. The money was used to open the new downtown office, hire several high-priced executives from competitors, and fund what they're calling a market expansion initiative, Sam explained. They're over-leveraged and vulnerable. Diane leaned forward, a predatory gleam in her eye. "The loans are through First Western Bank. As it happens, I represent several major investors there." I saw where she was going. "You think we can acquire the debt?" Not directly. That would trigger conflict of interest concerns. But through a separate investment vehicle, with private backing? Absolutely. It was elegant and ruthless. If we controlled the company's debt, we gained significant leverage over its operations. If they defaulted, which given their current management trajectory seemed increasingly likely, we could potentially force a reorganization or even a sale. We'd need investors willing to move quickly and discreetly, I noted. Diane smiled. Leave that to me. Within 2 weeks, Diane had assembled a small group of investors, former clients of mine who'd valued our work, business associates who'd witnessed my contribution to the firm, and one particularly motivated angel investor named Margaret Winters, a breast cancer survivor herself who had lost her position as CEO during her treatment 2 decades earlier. Some battles are personal, Margaret told me when we met. Some are business. The best ones are both. Together, they formed Phoenix Capital Partners, a name I chose deliberately. From the ashes, I would rise. While Diane and Margaret worked on the financial strategy, I focused on rebuilding my strength. My last chemotherapy treatment was followed by radiation, less debilitating, but still exhausting. Throughout it all, I maintained my communications with Kevin and Lisa, gathering information, building my case, preparing for whatever came next. The world James and Rachel had built began crumbling sooner than expected. Without my client relationship approach, retention rates were falling. Without my ethical screening process, they'd taken on 2 particularly problematic clients that brought negative publicity. Without my team management style, key employees were leaving for competitors. When Phoenix Capital Partners quietly purchased Mitchell Consulting's debt from First Western Bank, James didn't even notice. The loans continued as before. Statements went to the same corporate address. Nothing appeared to change. Until the day Phoenix called the loan. I wasn't present when James received the notice. Immediate repayment of $2. $1 million required under the acceleration clause, triggered by their failure to maintain the client retention metrics specified in the fine print. Kevin later told me, James's face had drained of all color, that he'd locked himself in his office with Rachel for hours afterward. The next day, I received a call from James himself, the first direct contact in 6 months. Whatever game you're playing, Sarah, it needs to stop, he said without greeting. His voice held none of the confidence from before. This company has employees who depend on it, real people with families. I'm well aware, I replied calmly. I hired many of them. If this is about the settlement, it's not about the settlement, James. It's about accountability. There was a pause. What do you want? A meeting, tomorrow, 10 a.m. at Diane Lowell's office. Bring Rachel and your attorney. He started to object, but I continued. If you don't show, Phoenix Capital proceeds with enforcement actions. The choice is yours. I hung up, heart racing despite my calm exterior. For the first time since my diagnosis, I felt fully alive again. Not just surviving, but reclaiming my power. The meeting the next day was a study in contrasts. James and Rachel arrived impeccably dressed, but visibly strained. Their attorney, a corporate shark I'd never liked, carried an oversized briefcase as if preparing for extended battle. I'd chosen my appearance carefully. A tailored suit that accommodated my still recovering body, hair covered with a stylish scarf, makeup. That emphasized my returning health rather than concealing my illness. I wanted them to see me, really see me, as the woman who had survived both cancer and betrayal and emerged stronger. Diane laid out our terms clinically. Phoenix Capital Partners would convert the debt to equity, taking controlling interest in Mitchell Consulting Group. Current management would be replaced. James and Rachel could retain minority shares but would have no operational role. This is extortion, James's attorney sputtered. Ms. Mitchell clearly orchestrated this entire scenario. Diane smiled thinly. Prove it. Rachel spoke for the first time, her voice tight. You can't just take the company. Actually, I replied, looking directly at her, I'm not taking anything. I'm paying for it, significantly more than you two were offering for my share, in fact. That's called business. James leaned forward, desperation edging into his voice. Sarah, be reasonable. We can work something out. A better settlement. A consulting role for you, whatever you want. I already have what I want, I replied. The choice now is simple. Accept these terms, or Phoenix forecloses and the company gets broken up and sold in pieces. Your employees lose their jobs, your clients get scattered to competitors, and your reputation in this industry becomes radioactive. Either way, I win. The silence that followed was deafening. 3 weeks later, I walked through the doors of Mitchell Consulting Group, now officially Phoenix Management Partners, as its majority owner and CEO. The reception area had been redecorated in Rachel's taste, all chrome and glass, cold and impersonal. That would be changing. Lisa met me at the door, a genuine smile breaking across her face. Welcome back, she said, handing me a visitor badge. This is just until we get your permanent credentials remade. No rush, I replied. I'm not going anywhere. Kevin had organized a small welcome reception in the main conference room. Not everyone attended. Some had been too thoroughly poisoned against me, others simply uncertain about the future. But enough familiar faces greeted me with warmth that I knew I wasn't starting from scratch. I know the past year has been tumultuous, I told the assembled group. Changes in leadership, direction, and structure have created uncertainty. I can't promise stability overnight, but I can promise transparency, ethical management, and a return to the core values that made this firm successful in the first place. Later that afternoon, I sat alone in what had once been James's office. What had once been our office back when we truly shared everything. The mountain view remained spectacular, though the decor had changed. I would change it again, making it truly mine this time. On the desk sat a small gift basket from Margaret. Winters with a handwritten note. The sweetest success is the kind they never see coming. Welcome back to the arena. I smiled, running my fingers over the embossed Phoenix logo we'd designed for the new company stationery. From medical crisis to personal betrayal to professional resurrection, my journey had been brutal, but it had forged me into someone stronger than I'd been before. Someone who understood that some battles choose you, and how you fight them defines who you become. James and Rachel had left Denver shortly after the ownership transfer, reportedly starting over in Seattle. I wished them no specific ill will. Their own choices would create whatever consequences they deserved. My focus remained firmly on the future, rebuilding the company, expanding our client base, creating the kind of workplace where loyalty and integrity mattered. 6 months after taking control, Phoenix Management Partners was thriving. We'd retained most of the original team while adding talented new members. Our client retention had stabilized, and new business was growing steadily. The culture was transforming, becoming more collaborative and supportive, the kind of environment where no one would be discarded because they became inconvenient or ill. On the 1-year anniversary of my final cancer treatment, I held a small celebration at C, my new home. Among the guests were Kevin and Lisa, Diane, Margaret, and the oncology nurses who had seen me through my darkest days. We raised glasses of champagne, or sparkling cider for those who preferred, to survival in all its forms. To second chances, Margaret toasted, and to women who refused to be written out of their own stories. As the evening wound down, Lisa pulled me aside. I never asked, "How did you come up with the money to fund Phoenix Capital so quickly? Even with investors, it must have been difficult while you were sick." I smiled. Remember that client in San Francisco 3 years ago? The tech startup founder who insisted I take part of my fee in stock options even though James thought it was too risky? Lisa's eyes widened. The one that went public last year? I nodded. James never knew how much those options were worth. He assumed I'd sold them years ago. My smile widened. Never underestimate the woman who handles the long-term planning. Later that night, after everyone had gone, I stood on my balcony looking out at the Denver skyline. The air had that same crispness it had held the morning I received my diagnosis. That lifetime ago when everything changed. I thought about the woman I'd been then, and the woman I was now. Cancer had taken things from me: time, energy, physical comfort, even hair temporarily. James had taken things too: trust, partnership, our shared home and history. But neither had been able to take my determination, my intelligence, or ultimately, my future. Some people collapse under betrayal. Others use it as fuel. The company, now thriving under my leadership, stood as testimony to which kind of person I had become. As I've learned, sometimes the most powerful words in business aren't "you're hired" or "deal closed," but simply these: "I'm still here." And I was, stronger, wiser, and finally completely free to write my own story. You know, someone once told me that success is the best revenge. But I've come to believe something different. Success isn't revenge at all. It's redemption. It's proving to yourself that what was done to you doesn't define what you can do. So let me ask you this. Have you ever been underestimated, discarded, or betrayed by someone who should have supported you? Have you ever had to fight for what was rightfully yours when you were at your weakest? If this story resonated with you, if something in my journey sparked recognition in your own experience, know that you're not alone. Drop a comment below if you've ever had to reinvent yourself after betrayal. Tell me where you're watching from. Share what part of this story made you pause or think differently. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss my next video, because the story never really ends. It just enters a new chapter, with you holding the pen. 2 years after taking back my company, I received an unexpected email. The subject line read simply, "Congratulations on your success." It was from James. "I heard Phoenix was named one of the fastest growing consultancies in the region," he wrote. "I always knew you had it in you." I stared at those words for a long time, noting what was missing. Any acknowledgement of his betrayal, any apology for abandoning me during cancer, any recognition of how he'd tried to erase my contributions. I started several responses, then deleted them all. In the end, I simply marked the email as read and went back to reviewing the expansion proposal. My team had prepared. James belonged to my past. Phoenix, my company, my vision, my future, was what mattered now. Some circles don't need closing. Some chapters end without resolution. And some victories speak loudly enough on their own. I'd like to say the divorce was quick and painless, but that would be lying. Every signature felt like another piece of my identity being carved away. Each document passed across the table represented another fragment of our life together, dispassionately divided and allocated. What hurt most wasn't losing the house or our shared possessions. It was watching James calculate exactly how little he could give me while I was too sick to fight back properly. My temporary apartment felt sterile and unfamiliar. I'd chosen it for practical reasons, close to the hospital, elevator building, minimal maintenance. But in those first weeks after James moved out, its emptiness echoed my hollowed-out heart. Cancer treatment leaves little energy for decorating or nesting. Most days, I barely managed to move between the bed and the couch. 3 weeks after James delivered the divorce papers, I received another envelope. This one contained the formal buyout offer for my share of Mitchell Consulting Group. The figure made me laugh out loud, a harsh sound in the empty apartment. It was barely 30% of what my stake was worth based on our last valuation just 7 months earlier. "They can't be serious," I told my sister Megan over the phone that evening. She had flown in from Chicago twice already since my diagnosis, and though she couldn't leave her family again so soon, she called daily. "They're banking on you being too exhausted to fight," she said, fury evident in her voice. "It's predatory and disgusting." It's all so stupid, I replied, staring at the lowball offer. They've forgotten who they're dealing with. Even at my weakest, with poison circulating through my veins to kill the mutinous cells, I was still Sarah Mitchell, the woman who had built a 7-figure consulting business from scratch, who had navigated complex corporate restructurings, who had outmaneuvered competitors with deeper pockets and longer histories. Cancer had taken many things from me, but not my strategic mind. The next morning, despite overwhelming fatigue, I showered, dressed in my most professional work clothes, now hanging loose on my thinning frame, and took a rideshare downtown. The offices of Lowell & Associates occupied the 30th floor of a sleek high-rise with views of the Rocky Mountains. The receptionist looked momentarily startled when I gave my name. Perhaps my appearance was more altered than I realized. "Ms. Mitchell," Diane Lowell said, extending her hand as she entered the lobby to greet me. "I appreciate you coming in person." Her grip was firm, her gaze direct as she assessed me. At 58, Diane had built one of Denver's most respected business law practices, known particularly for handling complex corporate disputes. Her silver-streaked dark hair was cut in a precise bob, and she wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. "I needed to get out of my apartment," I said simply, following her to a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows. "And this matter requires my full attention." I placed the buyout offer on the table between us. Diane glanced at it, then back at me, one eyebrow raised. "They're either desperate or delusional," she observed. "Or they think cancer has made me both weak and stupid," I replied. Her lips quirked slightly. "What exactly are you looking for, Ms. Mitchell?" "First, call me Sarah," I said. "Second, I want to understand my options. And third—" I paused, organizing my thoughts. "I need someone who won't treat me like I'm already dead." Diane's expression softened fractionally. "I can see why you've been successful, Sarah. Let's talk about how to ensure you continue to be." For the next 2 hours, we dissected my situation. I explained how James and I had structured the company, the operating agreement we'd crafted, my role in building our client base and methodology. Diane took meticulous notes, occasionally stopping me to ask clarifying questions. "The facts are these," she finally said. "You co-founded the firm. You own 45% equity. You've been a key principal attracting and retaining clients. Your husband has presented you with a buyout offer that dramatically undervalues your stake, presumably hoping your illness will pressure you to accept unfavorable terms." She tapped her pen against her notepad. "What concerns me is their urgency. Why push for such a quick resolution when you're clearly dealing with health issues? That suggests they're hiding something or planning moves they don't want you to know about." I'd wondered the same thing. The timing was suspicious, not just the divorce, which was painful enough, but the aggressive push to remove me from the company entirely. "I need to find out what they're doing," I said, more to myself than to Diane. "Yes, you do," she agreed. "And while you investigate, we stall on the buyout. I'll draft a response requesting extensive documentation to properly evaluate their offer, balance sheets, client lists, accounts receivable, pending deals, everything we're entitled to as part of due diligence." "They'll resist," I warned. Diane smiled, a slight predatory edge to it. "I'm counting on it. Their resistance will buy us time and potentially reveal what they're trying to conceal." As I left her office that afternoon, I felt something I hadn't experienced since finding James with Rachel in that hospital cafeteria. A sense of agency. I wasn't just passively receiving blows anymore. I was planning my response. Cancer might have temporarily diminished my physical strength, but my strategic mind was waking from its shock-induced slumber. That evening, feeling more energized than I had in weeks, I created a secure email account under a generic name and reached out to Sam Torres, the forensic accountant Diane had recommended. His reply came within hours. He could begin immediately. if I could provide initial documentation. I hesitated, assessing what I still had access to. Though I'd stepped away from daily operations during treatment, I technically remained an officer of the company. My credentials should still work on our cloud storage and financial platforms. The question wasn't whether I could access information, but whether I should, and whether James would notice if I did. Caution won out. Before diving into company records, I needed to understand exactly where I stood legally. The last thing I needed was James claiming I'd improperly accessed data, giving him ammunition against me. Instead, I started with what I already possessed: tax returns from previous years, the original business plan, client agreements I'd personally negotiated, emails stored in my personal account. It wasn't comprehensive, but it provided a baseline for Sam to work from. The next day, Diane's office sent our official response to the buyout offer, a masterpiece of polite obstruction requesting exhaustive documentation before we could give proper consideration to their generous proposal. James's attorney responded within hours, pushing for an expedited resolution, given the circumstances. The circumstances being your cancer, Diane translated when she called to update me. They're practically ghoulish in their attempts to leverage your illness. We'll continue to insist on complete transparency as a prerequisite for any agreement. A week later, after my next chemo session, I received an unexpected text from Lisa, our HR director. Can we talk? Not about work. Personal. We'd always been friendly but never close outside the office. Her reaching out now, when I'd been effectively sidelined, piqued my curiosity. We met at a quiet cafe far from the office. Lisa arrived looking nervous, glancing around as if worried about being seen. When she spotted me in the corner, a look of shock briefly crossed her face before she controlled her expression. "Sarah," she said, sliding into the seat across from me. "Thank you for meeting. She hesitated. "I'm so sorry about everything." I nodded, waiting. People often didn't know what to say about either cancer or divorce, let alone both simultaneously. But Lisa's discomfort seemed to run deeper than social awkwardness. "How are things at the office?" I asked, offering her an opening. She grimaced. "That's partly why I wanted to talk. It's changing. Rapidly." Over the next half hour, Lisa shared observations that confirmed my worst suspicions. James and Rachel had wasted no time in reshaping the company. Key employees loyal to me had been marginalized or pushed out. Client relationships I'd cultivated were being reassigned. Our core business methodology, the structured approach to organizational consulting I'd largely developed, was being modified to focus on faster, less comprehensive engagements. "They're calling it streamlining for growth," Lisa said, making air quotes. "But it feels like they're turning us into one of those churn and burn shops that prioritize quick fees over actual client outcomes." "Why are you telling me this?" I asked directly. "It's a risk for you." Lisa looked down at her coffee. "I believed in what we built. The culture, the approach, the ethics, it's all being dismantled. And the way they talk about you," she shook her head, "like you're already gone. Like your contribution was minimal. It feels wrong." "I appreciate your loyalty," I said carefully, "but I don't want you jeopardizing your position." "That ship might have sailed," she admitted. "I've pushed back on some changes, especially the ones affecting staff benefits. I'm probably already on the chopping block." As our conversation continued, Lisa revealed more concerning details. James had established a new entity called Summit Strategies, ostensibly as a subsidiary focused on emerging market opportunities. But the business address for this new entity was Rachel's condo, and somehow, promising leads that came to Mitchell Consulting were being redirected to Summit if they matched certain criteria. "What criteria?" I asked, my attention sharpening. "High value potential, minimal complexity, quick turnaround projects," Lisa explained. "The ideal engagements, low effort, High reward. They're cherry-picking, I murmured, the implications becoming clear. Routing the most profitable prospects to their separate entity while keeping the complex, resource-intensive clients with Mitchell. Lisa nodded. That's my suspicion, but I can't prove it without access to both sets of books. By the time we parted, I had a much clearer picture of what I was facing. This wasn't just James pushing me out during a vulnerable time. This was a calculated business strategy. Use Mitchell Consulting's reputation and resources to identify premium opportunities, then divert them to a separate entity that I had no ownership in. Meanwhile, the value of my stake in Mitchell would steadily decline as the best prospects disappeared. It was elegant in its ruthlessness. It was also, potentially, fraud. That evening, I called Diane to update her on what I'd learned. She listened, without interruption, taking notes. "This changes our approach," she said when I finished. "If they're diverting business opportunities, that's a breach of fiduciary duty. James has legal obligations to the company and to you as a minority shareholder that he's violating. But we need evidence, concrete, admissible evidence." "Lisa can only tell me what she observes," I said. "She doesn't have access to the financial records that would prove it." "No, but you might," Diane replied. "As an officer of the company and significant equity holder, you have rights to examine corporate records. We'll make a formal request under the shareholder inspection provision in Colorado corporate law." "Won't that tip them off that we're investigating?" "Absolutely," Diane confirmed. "But sometimes the reaction to an investigation reveals as much as the investigation itself. Let's see how they respond when we start asking pointed questions about summit strategies." The formal request went out the next day, a precisely worded legal document demanding inspection of corporate records, including financial statements, client contracts, and communications regarding business development and client acquisition. It also specifically requested all documents relating to the formation and operation of Summit Strategies and its relationship to Mitchell Consulting Group. The response was immediate and revealing. James's attorney called Diane, blustering about fishing expeditions and harassment during a difficult personal time. He claimed any review would need to be severely limited in scope and conducted under strict supervision to protect proprietary information. "They're panicking," Diane reported, a note of satisfaction in her voice. "If everything were above board, they'd simply comply with the legal requirement. Their resistance tells us we're on the right track." After several days of legal back and forth, we reached a compromise. I would be permitted to review a limited set of financial records at the company's office, supervised by their corporate counsel. The inspection was scheduled for the following Tuesday, deliberately timed, I suspected, to coincide with my next chemotherapy session. "They're counting on you being too ill to attend," Diane observed when I pointed out the timing. "We can reschedule." "No," I decided. "Let them think I can't make it. You go as my legal representative. I want to see what they show you when they think I'm not watching." The strategy worked better than we could have hoped. Believing I would be incapacitated by treatment, they presented Diane with carefully curated records showing the company's performance had indeed declined in recent months, conveniently aligning with the period of my reduced involvement. They provided minimal information about Summit Strategies, claiming it was an exploratory initiative still in development. What they didn't know was that I had postponed my treatment by 1 day, a decision made in consultation with my oncologist, who understood the importance of this battle to my overall well-being. While Diane officially reviewed documents in the conference room, I met secretly with Lisa in a coffee shop 3 blocks away. "I can't take company documents," she had warned me in advance, "but I've been keeping notes." Those notes proved invaluable. Lisa had documented specific instances of client opportunities being redirected, including names, potential contract values, and the individuals involved in the decisions. She had dates, times, and snippets of conversations overheard between James and Rachel discussing which prospects should go to SS and which should stay with MCG. There's more, Lisa said, handing me a slip of paper with a password. This will get you into the share drive where the marketing team keeps their lead tracking spreadsheet. It shows initial contacts and where they ended up. I noticed a pattern. The ones that disappear without explanation from our pipeline often reappear as Summit clients a few months later. I raised an eyebrow. How would you know they become Summit clients? Lisa smiled slightly. Rachel's assistant Zoe is indiscreet. She likes to name-drop their impressive new clients, not realizing I'm tracking the pattern. That evening, after confirming with Diane that my official records inspection had revealed little of value, I logged into the company system using my still active credentials and the password Lisa had provided. The marketing lead tracking database was exactly where she had described, and it told a damning story. Over the past 5 months, 27 high-potential leads had disappeared from Mitchell Consulting's pipeline with vague notes like, no, longer pursuing, or decided to go another direction. Using information from Lisa about known Summit clients, I could connect 15 of those supposedly lost opportunities to Summit's new client roster. The potential revenue from just those 15 clients exceeded $8 million. I documented everything meticulously, taking screenshots and downloading spreadsheets before carefully logging out. Then I forwarded it all to Diane and Sam with one question. Is this enough? Their joint response came the next morning after me. They'd reviewed the evidence. It's a start. We need to go deeper. Sam outlined his preliminary assessment. Based on the pattern of diverted opportunities and the timing of Summit's formation, we're potentially looking at corporate theft and breach of fiduciary duty. But to build a truly compelling case, we need to establish the full financial impact and demonstrate clear intent. Over the next 2 weeks, as I continued my treatment regimen, our investigation expanded on multiple fronts. Diane used the limited information gained during the official records inspection to craft increasingly specific demands for additional documents. Each request was designed not just to obtain information, but to force James and his attorneys to either reveal more than they intended or openly refuse legitimate shareholder requests, either outcome benefiting our position. Meanwhile, Lisa continued her careful documentation from inside, providing insights we couldn't have gained otherwise. Through her, we learned that Rachel had been promoted to Chief Strategy Officer, a newly created position that gave her authority over client acquisition, and conveniently, the power to determine which opportunities went to which entity. Kevin Matthews, our head of research, became another unexpected ally. He approached Lisa after overhearing an argument between James and a longtime client who was upset about being assigned a new account manager without consultation. Something feels off, he told her. James is making decisions that don't make business sense unless there's an agenda we're not seeing. Lisa, after carefully assessing his trustworthiness, brought him into our growing circle of informants. Kevin's position gave him visibility into client deliverables and billable hours, data that proved crucial in establishing how resources were being allocated between Mitchell clients and the diverted opportunities now with Summit. The picture that emerged was more calculated than I had initially suspected. It wasn't just about redirecting promising new leads. Existing Mitchell clients were being subtly evaluated for their potential transfer to Summit. Those with the highest profit margins and lowest service demands were finding reasons to be dissatisfied with Mitchell's service, only to be approached later by Rachel representing Summit with promises of more attentive service. They're systematically stripping Mitchell of its most valuable assets, Sam concluded after reviewing our growing body of evidence, both prospective and existing clients. At this rate, Mitchell will be left with only the most difficult, resource-intensive accounts while Summit cream skims the profitable relationships. The implications for my ownership stake were obvious. By the time they finally pressured me into accepting a buyout, Mitchell Consulting would be a hollow shell of its former self, its value deliberately diminished while Summit flourished. It's time to change our approach, Diane advised during a strategy session in my apartment. My treatment had progressed to the point where my immune system was too compromised for public meetings. We've been gathering evidence defensively. Now we need to think offensively. I nodded, adjusting the scarf covering my now bare scalp. The hair loss had been one of the hardest visible signs of my illness, but I was past vanity now. What do you suggest? 2 parallel tracks, Diane said. First, we file a formal derivative action against James for breach of fiduciary duty, supported by the evidence we've gathered. This forces the issue into the open and potentially puts Summit's operations under judicial scrutiny. And second, we make direct contact with key Mitchell clients who've been approached about transferring to Summit. We ensure they understand the situation, that they're being manipulated as part of a scheme to devalue a company co-founded by someone fighting cancer. I winced slightly. Using my illness as leverage feels uncomfortable. It's not leveraging your illness, Diane corrected. It's exposing their exploitation of it. There's a difference. They're counting on your silence and incapacity. Breaking both expectations changes the dynamic. After consideration, I approved the strategy. The derivative action was filed the following week, a detailed legal complaint alleging corporate opportunity theft, breach of fiduciary duty, and fraudulent business practices. Simultaneously, I began reaching out to selected clients I had personal relationships with, delicately explaining the situation without explicitly asking them to take sides. The response was immediate and multifaceted. James's attorney filed an aggressive motion to dismiss our complaint, calling it a transparent attempt by a disgruntled former executive to disrupt legitimate business operations. Several carefully worded quotes appeared in business publications suggesting I was struggling to accept my diminished role due to health issues. More telling were the frantic messages James sent directly to my personal email, the first direct communication since our divorce was finalized. "This needs to stop immediately," he wrote. "You're damaging the very company you claim to care about. The stress and disruption aren't good for anyone, especially in your condition." My condition, as if my cancer were a personal failing rather than a disease I was fighting with everything I had. But the most significant response came from the clients I'd contacted. 3 major accounts, representing over $2 million in annual billing, expressed concerns about the attempted transitions to Summit and requested meetings to discuss their future relationship with Mitchell. 2 others reached out independently, after hearing industry rumors about our legal filing, seeking clarification about the company's stability. "They've miscalculated," Diane observed during our next strategy call. "They thought your illness would sideline you completely, making their scheme essentially risk-free. They never expected you to fight back so effectively while undergoing treatment. The truth was, the fight was keeping me going. On days when the nausea was overwhelming or fatigue made even sitting up a challenge, I focused on the evidence we were gathering, the strategy we were implementing, the progress we were making. It gave me purpose beyond mere survival." Unexpectedly, our legal action attracted attention from business publications covering the consulting industry. A reporter from Denver Business Journal contacted Diane requesting comment on what she described as allegations of corporate opportunity theft during a medical leave. After discussion, we decided Diane would provide a limited statement emphasizing the core issue, that a company co-founder's ownership stake was being deliberately devalued through improper business practices while she underwent cancer treatment. The statement was factual, dignified, and devastatingly effective when published alongside James's attorney's blustering denial. The article included a photo of me from a Chamber of Commerce event the previous year, smiling and healthy beside James as we accepted an award for business innovation. The contrast with my current reality was jarring, but it humanized the legal battle in ways dry court filings couldn't. 3 days after the article appeared, I received a text message from Rachel's assistant Zoe. I didn't know what was really happening. I'm sorry. If you need information, I might be able to help. Diane advised caution. This could be genuine remorse, or it could be an attempt to gather intelligence on our strategy. After careful consideration, I arranged a meeting with Zoe, at a location neither close to my apartment nor the office. I arrived early, positioning myself to observe her arrival. She came alone, looking nervous but not furtive, carrying nothing but her phone and a small purse. "Why the change of heart?" I asked once we were seated in a quiet corner, after declining her awkward expressions of sympathy about my health. Zoe fidgeted with her coffee cup. "When I started working with Rachel, she said you had stepped back voluntarily to focus on your health, that you were supportive of her new role. The summit thing was described as a strategic expansion you'd approved before your diagnosis. And now? Now I've seen the article and the emails flying back and forth about the lawsuit. And," she hesitated, "I found documents while filing that contradict what I've been told. Projections comparing Mitchell's declining value against Summit's growth. Strategies for client migration with your key accounts highlighted." My expression remained neutral despite the confirmation of our suspicions. "That could cost you your job if they knew you were here." She nodded. "Probably, but my mom had breast cancer when I was in high school. She survived, thankfully. Watching what they're doing while knowing what you're going through." She shook her head. I couldn't stay silent. Over the next hour, Zoe provided specific details about Summit's operations, including confirmation that the entity had been planned months before my diagnosis, not as a legitimate expansion, but as a vehicle to gradually extract value from Mitchell. She described meetings where James and Rachel explicitly discussed which clients could be transitioned without raising red flags, and how my illness had been viewed as fortunate timing that would make the process easier. "Do you have access to any of these documents or meeting notes?" I asked. "Some," she admitted. "I'm not supposed to, but Rachel doesn't always password protect sensitive files, and I handle her digital filing. We established a secure method for her to share information, a technique Sam recommended that would protect both Zoe's identity and the chain of evidence if documents needed to be used in legal proceedings." Before we parted, I asked the question that had been nagging at me since she reached out. When did their relationship start? Was it after my diagnosis or before? Zoe looked uncomfortable. "I can't say exactly, but Rachel had a photograph of them together on her personal phone's lock screen by last Christmas. That would have been at least 2 months before your diagnosis." The timeline landed like a physical blow. Not opportunistic abandonment during crisis then, but a premeditated betrayal that had simply accelerated when my illness provided convenient cover. That night, alone in my apartment, I finally allowed myself to fully process the scope of what we'd uncovered. This wasn't just business misconduct or personal betrayal. It was a comprehensive strategy to exploit my illness, erase my professional contributions, and extract the value I'd helped create for someone else's benefit. The depth of calculation involved was staggering. James and Rachel hadn't just seen an opportunity when I got sick. They had already been laying groundwork to undermine me. My cancer diagnosis hadn't caused their betrayal. It had merely accelerated an existing plan and provided convenient cover for their actions. As I sat with this revelation, something unexpected happened. Instead of feeding my anger or deepening my hurt, it brought clarity. This wasn't about me failing or being found wanting. It wasn't even about James falling out of love. This was about greed, opportunism, and moral bankruptcy, none of which reflected on my worth or contribution. For the first time since my diagnosis, I felt something like gratitude, not for the betrayal itself, but for the clarity it had forced upon me. The marriage I mourned had been a mirage. The partnership I valued had been undermined long before I knew it was in danger. And the business I had helped build was being systematically dismantled by the very people who should have protected it. Most importantly, I recognized that fighting back wasn't just about justice or revenge. It was about protecting what I had helped create from those who would destroy it for short-term gain. It was about standing up for the employees whose livelihoods were jeopardized by James and Rachel's self-serving schemes. And yes, it was about ensuring I received fair value for the years of work I had invested. The next morning, I contacted Diane with a clear directive. I don't just want to stop them. I want to take back what's mine. The investigation had served its purpose. It had exposed the rot at the core of what James and Rachel were doing. It had provided leverage against their attempts to force me into an unfavorable settlement. And, most importantly, it had awakened something in me that cancer and betrayal had temporarily dimmed, my fighting spirit. Now it was time to move from defense to offense, from investigation to action, from victim to victor. The evidence we had gathered painted a damning picture of corporate malfeasance and personal betrayal. But evidence alone wouldn't restore what had been taken from me. For that, we needed a strategy as comprehensive and calculated as the one deployed against me, but with one crucial difference. Mine would be built on truth, transparency, and legitimate business principles rather than deception and exploitation. And it would begin with a simple, direct question to James and his attorneys. Given what we now know, how would you like to proceed? Their answer would determine whether the next phase would be a negotiated resolution or all-out corporate warfare. Either way, I was prepared. The woman they had tried to erase while she fought cancer was finding her voice again. And this time, she wouldn't be silenced. I should have anticipated the ferocity of their response. The morning after we sent our evidence-backed settlement proposal to James's attorney, I woke to a series of increasingly alarming developments. First came the email from our IT director, Mark, sent at 5:37 a.m. Just got notification all your access credentials have been terminated. Emergency protocol invoked citing security concerns. Something big is happening. By 7:15, Lisa called in a panic. They're conducting an emergency. All staff meeting at 8:30. Attendance mandatory. In person. James is bringing in security consultants. By 9:00, Kevin texted, "They're claiming you've engaged in corporate espionage, unauthorized system access, data theft. James is telling everyone the company may pursue criminal charges." My hands shook as I forwarded these messages to Diane. Their strategy was as transparent as it was ruthless. Transform me from victim to villain, from co-founder fighting for her rightful place to disgruntled ex-employee committing corporate sabotage. The accusations of criminal behavior were particularly calculated, designed to isolate me from potential allies and taint any evidence we'd gathered. Diane called immediately. "This is a classic intimidation tactic. They're trying to scare you into backing down and frighten your internal supporters into silence. But it tells us something important. They're terrified of what we've discovered." "What about Lisa and Kevin? They could lose their jobs for helping me." "That's a risk," Diane acknowledged. "But in Colorado, we have whistleblower protections for employees reporting potentially unlawful business practices. If they're terminated for providing truthful information about misconduct, we can add wrongful termination to our growing list of claims." The intimidation campaign escalated throughout the day. By afternoon, James had sent a company-wide email about disturbing security breaches and confidential business information being compromised by unauthorized access. Without naming me directly, the implications were clear. I was being positioned as a threat to the company's security and stability. Then came the legal salvo. At 4:45 p.m., just before courts closed for the day, James's attorneys filed for an emergency temporary restraining order against me, claiming I had illegally accessed proprietary company systems and misappropriated confidential business information. They demanded I surrender all company documents in my possession and cease all contact with Mitchell Consulting employees and clients. "Pure theater," Diane said when she called to inform me. They filed late Friday knowing we can't effectively respond until Monday. It's designed to leave you isolated and anxious all weekend while they control the narrative." She was right about the anxiety part. Despite the brave face I maintained during our call, after hanging up I found myself struggling to breathe, the walls of my apartment seemingly closing in. The aggressive escalation had caught me off guard, triggering the vulnerability I'd been fighting to overcome since my diagnosis. For a dangerous moment, I contemplated giving up. The thought of adding a legal battle to my already exhausting cancer fight felt overwhelming. Maybe accepting James's lowball offer and walking away would be easier than enduring more conflict. My body was already at war with itself. Did I really need another front? The moment passed when I spotted the most recent scan results on my kitchen counter. The treatment was working, tumor markers decreasing, cancer responding to the chemotherapy. I was fighting for my life and winning that battle. I could certainly fight for my company too. I picked up the phone and called Megan. My sister had always been my emotional bedrock, the person who knew exactly what to say when doubt crept in. "They're scared," she said after I explained the situation. "Think about it, Sarah. If you were truly irrelevant to the company's success as they've claimed, why this panicked response? Why not just let you flail around ineffectually?" She had a point. The severity of their reaction revealed the threat they believed I posed. "Remember that settlement negotiation you handled with the pharmaceutical company last year?" Megan continued. "What did you tell me then?" I smiled despite myself, recalling the conversation. That the size of the security team they brought to the meeting told me exactly how vulnerable they knew their position was. Exactly. James isn't responding like someone confident in his legal and ethical standing. He's responding like someone who's been caught and is desperately trying to change the subject. By the time we ended our call, my resolve had returned. I spent the remainder of the evening documenting everything I could remember about company systems, client relationships, and business processes. Information I had every right to know as co-founder, but might lose access to if the temporary restraining order was granted. Monday morning brought the legal showdown. Diane represented me at the emergency hearing while I remained home, my latest round of chemotherapy having left me too physically depleted for court. The judge, a no-nonsense woman with 20 years, on the bench, seemed skeptical of the urgency James's attorneys claimed. "Your Honor," Diane argued, "this is a transparent attempt to silence a company co-founder who has uncovered serious financial improprieties. Ms. Mitchell accessed systems she had every right to access as an officer of the company. The real issue isn't security. It's that she discovered evidence of corporate opportunity theft and client appropriation." After hearing both sides, the judge denied the most extreme elements of the restraining order. I would need to refrain from accessing company systems going forward, but I could retain documents already in my possession, provided they were only used for legitimate legal purposes. Most importantly, the judge refused to prohibit me from communicating with Mitchell employees or clients. "The court will not issue a gag order preventing individuals from speaking truthfully about their experiences," she stated firmly. "Mr. Mitchell may not use this court to shield himself from uncomfortable conversations." It was our first public victory, but the battle was just beginning. By Tuesday morning, James had pivoted to a new strategy. If he couldn't legally silence me, he would control the narrative by getting ahead of it. Denver Business Journal published an exclusive interview with James, portrayed as the dedicated leader, steering Mitchell Consulting through challenging transitions. He expressed vague personal regret about our divorce, but framed it as a mutual decision to focus on different priorities, mine on the business, Sarah's on her health journey. Most infuriating was his revisionist history of our company's founding. While Sarah provided valuable input in our early days, he told the reporter, the core consulting methodology and client acquisition strategy that built Mitchell Consulting has always been my domain. The article mentioned my unfortunate health, challenges, and diminished role over the past year, while highlighting Rachel's instrumental contributions to the firm's evolution. Us? A photo showed them standing together in our redesigned office space, looking confidently toward a future that explicitly didn't include me. Well, that's a masterclass in gaslighting, I muttered, tossing the paper aside after reading it 3 times, my anger growing with each review. I had expected attacks, but seeing my professional legacy being systematically erased hit differently than personal betrayal. James wasn't just leaving me. He was actively rewriting history to minimize my contributions to our shared creation. The business I'd poured a decade of my life into was being retconned into his achievement, with my role reduced to supportive spouse. The article prompted a flood of awkward messages from industry colleagues and friends, people unsure what to believe, trying to navigate the contradiction between James's polished narrative and their own knowledge of my involvement in building. Mitchell Consulting. "Is it true you'd stepped back before your diagnosis?" texted Andrea, a former client who'd become a friend. James makes it sound like the transition was already happening. "Just read the business journal piece. Seems like they're doing well despite everything. Hope you're focusing on healing," wrote another connection, clearly accepting James's framing. Most painful was the email from David Mercer, our first major client whose manufacturing business we'd helped restructure 7 years earlier. "Sarah, I'm confused by what I'm hearing. James tells me you've chosen to fully disengage from the business to focus on your health, yet I'm also hearing rumors of legal disputes. What's really happening?" The gaslighting wasn't just professional, it was becoming personal. People I'd known for years were questioning not just my role in the company, but my motivations and mental state. The subtext was clear: perhaps cancer. And divorce had left me unstable, vindictive, unable to gracefully step aside for the good of the company. I forwarded the article to Diane, who responded with characteristic bluntness. "They're getting ahead of the story. We need to respond, but thoughtfully. This isn't about trading public accusations, it's about strategic positioning." She was right. Engaging in a public mudslinging match would only diminish me professionally and personally. We needed a more sophisticated approach. After discussion with our growing team, now including a strategic communications consultant Diane had brought in, we developed a 3-pronged response. First, I would reach out personally to key industry contacts and major clients with whom I had established relationships, offering to discuss the situation directly rather than through media narratives. Second, we would prepare a factual, documented account of Mitchell Consulting's founding and growth, highlighting my specific contributions to its methodology, client relationships, and success, ready to share if questions arose, but not proactively disseminated. Third, and most importantly, we would focus our legal efforts not on reputation management, but on the substantive business misconduct we had uncovered. Truth, documented and presented professionally, would ultimately speak louder than James's revisionist narrative. I spent the next day drafting careful responses to those who had reached out, including David Mercer. My message to him was particularly important given his prominence in our industry. "David, thank you for asking directly. The situation is complicated, but can be stated simply. I did not choose to step away from Mitchell Consulting. I reduced my in-office presence during cancer treatment, but remained involved in strategic decisions until recently discovering financial improprieties I was ethically obligated to address. I'd welcome the opportunity to speak with you directly rather than communicating through intermediaries or press accounts." His response came within hours. "I suspected as much. James's version never quite added up. I'm free tomorrow afternoon if you'd like to talk." Our conversation the following day lasted nearly 2 hours. I shared the documented timeline of events, my diagnosis, James's initially supportive behavior, the sudden divorce filing, the low-ball buyout offer, and finally, the discovery of Summit strategies and the systematic diversion of business opportunities. This explains a lot, David said when I finished. 3 months ago, Rachel approached me about potentially moving our account to their premium service division at Summit. The pitch emphasized more personalized attention and specialized expertise, but something felt off about it. Now I understand why. What did you tell them? I asked. That I'd think about it. He paused. Sarah, I've worked with you for 7 years. Your approach to our challenges saved my family business when conventional consultants wanted us to slash our workforce and sell off divisions. I haven't forgotten that. By the end of our conversation, David had not only committed to keeping his business with Mitchell rather than transferring to Summit, but also offered to speak with other long-standing clients who might be receiving similar pitches. Business ethics matter, he said simply. What they're doing isn't just wrong because it hurts you. It's wrong because it violates the trust this industry is built on. David's support marked a turning point. Over the next week, several other major clients reached out after speaking with him, each conversation helping counter the narrative James was promoting. I wasn't just defending my reputation anymore. I was rebuilding my professional network from a position of transparency and documented facts. But as my external support grew, the internal situation at Mitchell Consulting deteriorated. Lisa called one evening, her voice tight with tension. They're conducting internal interrogations, she reported. It is reviewing email logs, looking for anyone who's communicated with you. 3 people were called into meetings with James and company counsel today. Kevin was one of them. Are they okay? I asked, stomach knotting with concern for the colleagues who had risked their positions to help me. For now. Kevin played it cool, said he'd responded to a simple question from you about benefit coverage during medical leave. Totally plausible, given your history and situation. And the others? Lisa hesitated. Rachel is leading the questioning. She's aggressive, making it clear that anyone maintaining contact with you is choosing sides against the company's interests. The pressure campaign continued to escalate. 2 days later, Mitchell Consulting announced a loyalty bonus for employees, an immediate $5,000 payment, with the only requirement being the signing of an enhanced confidentiality agreement that specifically prohibited sharing company information with former executives or their representatives. It was a thinly veiled attempt to buy silence and isolation. For employees with mortgages, families, and financial obligations, turning down an unexpected $5,000 would be difficult, especially when the alternative might be becoming a target of suspicion. It's a classic divide-and-conquer tactic, Sam observed during our strategy call that evening. Creating financial incentives that align employees against you while making it appear generous rather than coercive. The following day brought perhaps the most personal attack yet. Through mutual acquaintances, I learned that Rachel had organized a company renewal happy hour where she freely discussed my supposed erratic behavior in the months before my medical leave, claims of mood swings, irrational decisions, and difficulty accepting feedback. She framed my current legal actions as an extension of this instability, suggesting my illness might be affecting my judgment. Using my cancer to question my mental competence was a new low, even for them. The implication that legitimate concerns about business misconduct were merely the delusions of a sick woman was both deeply sexist and callously exploitative of health stereotypes. That night, I found myself staring at the ceiling at 3 a.m., a familiar insomnia having returned. Not from chemo side effects this time, but from the sheer weight of fighting on so many fronts simultaneously. The physical battle against cancer, the legal battle for my company, the narrative battle for my professional reputation, the emotional battle against betrayal and erasure. For a dark moment, I wondered if it was worth continuing. Perhaps James and Rachel had calculated correctly. That, eventually, the combined pressure would become too exhausting to sustain, that I would accept their terms simply to find peace. The turning point came unexpectedly. While scrolling through emails during my sleepless night, I found a message from an unfamiliar address with the subject line, "You're not alone." Inside was a simple message. "We're watching. We're documenting. We believe you. MCG Concerned Employees." Attached was a screenshot of a spreadsheet titled Client Transition Strategy, with columns tracking high-value Mitchell clients, their contract renewal dates, identified pain points, and targeted dates for migration to Summit. It was undeniable evidence of the systematic client poaching we'd been working to prove. The following morning, more messages arrived from anonymous. Company email addresses, snippets of conversations, meeting notes, documentation of the internal campaign against me. Employees I had never directly worked with, who had no personal loyalty to me but recognized the ethical breach occurring, were silently gathering evidence. "The interrogations backfired," Lisa explained when I called her. "People who weren't initially involved started paying attention, questioning the official narrative. When Rachel started holding what amounts to loyalty tests, it triggered exactly what they were trying to prevent. People looking more closely at what's actually happening. This unexpected development gave me renewed energy. I wasn't fighting alone against a united front. There were people inside Mitchell Consulting who recognized the injustice unfolding, who valued truth over expediency, who were unwilling to be complicit in the erasure of my contribution or the dismantling of the company culture we'd built. With this internal documentation supplementing our existing evidence, Diane filed an expanded legal complaint, now including charges of defamation, tortious interference with business relationships, and intentional infliction of emotional distress, alongside the original claims of corporate opportunity theft and breach of fiduciary duty. James's response was immediate and desperate. Within 24 hours of our filing, his attorney contacted Diane with an improved settlement offer, still inadequate but significantly higher than the original proposal. The accompanying message suggested we could all move forward without further unpleasantness if I would accept their terms and drop all claims. "They're feeling the pressure," Diane observed. "But this isn't just about money anymore, is it?" She was right. What had started as a fight for fair compensation had evolved into something more fundamental. This was about truth, accountability, and refusing to allow serious misconduct to be hidden behind narratives of my health journey or graceful succession. "Decline the offer," I instructed, "and let them know we're prepared for full discovery, including depositions of all parties involved." The mention of depositions, sworn testimony under oath, triggered another escalation. James's attorney requested an emergency settlement conference, suggesting a neutral mediator help us reach resolution before positions became further entrenched. Translation: before anyone had to testify under oath about what had really happened, we agreed to the settlement conference scheduled for the following week. Not because I expected meaningful resolution, but because it would force them to articulate their position more fully and reveal what they feared most about potential litigation. The day before the conference, I experienced a disturbing new tactic in their pressure campaign. While leaving my oncologist's office after a follow-up appointment, I noticed a man photographing me from a car across the street. When I looked directly at him, he didn't hide or leave. He simply continued taking photos. Later that same day, someone called my sister Megan at her workplace, asking detailed questions about my health condition and prognosis for insurance purposes. When she demanded identification, the caller hung up. "They're trying to rattle you before tomorrow," Diane said when I reported these incidents. "Classic intimidation tactics. They want you emotional and off balance for the settlement discussion." "Well, it worked," I admitted, my voice shaking slightly. "Following me to medical appointments crosses a line I didn't think even James would cross." "All the more reason to remain strategic rather than emotional tomorrow," she counseled. Their desperation is showing. People who feel confident in their position don't resort to these tactics. The settlement conference itself was held in a sterile conference room at a downtown law office building. I arrived early with Diane and Sam, steeling myself for the first face-to-face encounter with James since our divorce had been finalized. When James entered with Rachel and his attorney, the physical changes in him surprised me. He'd lost weight, deep lines etched between his brows, his normally impeccable appearance slightly disheveled. Rachel, by contrast, was perfectly polished, her hand resting possessively on his arm as they walked in. The mediator, a retired judge with decades of experience in business disputes, began by establishing ground rules for the discussion. He spoke. I caught James studying me, perhaps assessing how cancer treatment had altered my appearance, looking for signs of weakness or fatigue he could exploit. I met his gaze steadily, refusing to show the turmoil his presence caused. Whatever we had once meant to each other had been systematically destroyed by his actions. Now he was simply the opponent in a business dispute, one I intended to win. The negotiation that followed was tense and often contentious. James's attorney presented their position first, acknowledging some irregularities in the handling of certain business opportunities, but characterizing them as administrative oversights, rather than deliberate misconduct. He proposed a settlement. That would give me 40% of my original equity value, plus a non-disclosure agreement preventing either party from discussing the matter publicly. When my turn came, Diane presented our counteroffer: full valuation of my equity based on the company's worth before the client poaching began, plus damages for the intentional devaluation scheme, and a public acknowledgement of my role as co-founder. That's completely unreasonable, James interjected, his composure cracking. The company can't possibly afford that payout, and I'm not going to publicly humiliate myself with some forced confession. Perhaps if you hadn't diverted assets and opportunities to Summit, the company could afford appropriate compensation, Sam replied calmly. And acknowledging facts isn't humiliation unless you believe the truth itself is shameful. The mediator worked diligently to find middle ground, but the gap between our positions remained vast. As the day progressed, James became increasingly agitated, at one point leaving the room after a particularly pointed discussion of the timeline of his relationship with Rachel, relative to my diagnosis. During one break, I found myself alone in the hallway with Rachel when returning from the restroom. She smiled thinly, blocking my path slightly. "This isn't personal, you know," she said, her voice low. "It's just business. You stepped away, creating a vacuum. Nature abhors a vacuum." I regarded her steadily. "I stepped away for cancer treatment, not career reconsideration. And systematically undermining someone fighting for their life is very personal, Rachel. Don't pretend otherwise." Her smile faltered. James made his choice. The company is moving forward. Fighting this only damages everyone involved, including you. Accept the settlement. Focus on your health. Move on. Something in her tone, the practiced concern masking dismissal, crystallized everything for me. She genuinely believed I should accept erasure, minimize my own interests, prioritize everyone else's convenience. That fighting for what was rightfully mine was somehow unreasonable compared to their theft of it. "That's the difference between us," I replied calmly. "You see my self-advocacy as inappropriate while viewing your opportunism as justified. Only one of us has confused ambition with ethics, and it isn't me." I stepped around her and returned to the conference room, a new clarity guiding my perspective. This wasn't just about money or professional recognition anymore. It was about refusing to accept the narrative that standing up for myself was somehow more problematic than the misconduct I was exposing. By late afternoon, it was clear no resolution would be reached. The mediator acknowledged the impasse, recommending we consider a second session after exchanging additional information. As we gathered our materials to leave, James approached, me directly for the first time. "This isn't going to end well for you, Sarah," he said quietly. "You're expending precious energy on a fight you can't win. The company has moved on. Clients have moved on. You should too. I looked at the man I had once built a life with, seeing him with perfect clarity perhaps for the first time. Not the charismatic partner I'd fallen in love with, or the betrayer, who'd abandoned me, but simply a person whose moral compromises had gradually eroded whatever integrity he once possessed. That's where you're wrong, James, I replied, my voice steady. This fight isn't depleting me, it's sustaining me. And unlike you, I don't measure victory by who walks away with the most money. I measure it by whether I can face myself in the mirror knowing I stood for what's right. His expression flickered. Surprise. Perhaps even a momentary flash of the shame he deserved to feel. But it passed quickly, replaced by the practiced neutrality of someone who had decided that ends justify means. As we left the failed settlement conference, Diane summarized our position. They're offering more money than before, which confirms they're worried, but they're still refusing to acknowledge the fundamental misconduct or your rightful position as co-founder. This isn't a settlement we can accept. I nodded, my resolve stronger than ever despite the exhausting day. Then we moved forward with full litigation, no more attempts at compromise. It will get uglier before it gets better, she warned. The surveillance, the intimidation, the character attacks, they'll all intensify. I know, I said, but I've survived cancer treatment. I can survive their pressure tactics. What I didn't add was that their escalating desperation had handed me something precious: certainty. Every extreme measure they took to silence me confirmed the legitimacy of my claims. Every attempt to pressure me into accepting erasure strengthened my determination to reclaim my rightful place. They wanted me to disappear quietly. Instead, I was finding my voice more clearly than ever before. That evening, alone in my apartment, I received an unexpected text from David Mercer. Had an interesting call today. Summit leadership apparently, offering premium discounts to transition our account. When I mentioned my concerns about their business practices, they became quite agitated. Thought you should know they're getting desperate. I smiled at the message. The power dynamic was shifting. What had begun as my isolated struggle against overwhelming odds was evolving into something more balanced. For every pressure tactic James and Rachel deployed, unexpected support emerged to counter it. My phone buzzed again with an incoming email. The subject line made my heart race. Private equity interest. Phoenix Partners. The message was from Margaret Winters, a formidable investor I'd worked with on a restructuring project 2 years earlier. She had recently completed breast cancer treatment herself and had reached out with personal support when learning of my diagnosis. Sarah, she wrote, I've been following the situation with Mitchell Consulting with interest. Their business practices concern me, both ethically and financially. I represent a group of investors who specialize in reclaiming mismanaged companies with strong fundamentals. If you're interested in discussing potential options beyond your current legal strategy, I'm available to meet discreetly. Sometimes, the best response to attempted corporate theft isn't just legal remedy, it's acquisition. I read the message 3 times, my mind racing with possibilities I hadn't previously considered. This wasn't just about defending against James's attempts to erase me or securing fair compensation for my stake. This could be about something far more comprehensive, taking back the company entirely. For the first time since my diagnosis, I found myself thinking not just about surviving the current battle, but about thriving in its aftermath. Not just reclaiming what was rightfully mine, but building something better from the ashes of betrayal. I drafted a simple reply to Margaret. Very interested in discussing. Available at your convenience. As I sent the message, I felt something shift inside me, a transformation from defensive resistance to proactive strategy. James and Rachel had tried to reduce me to my illness, to frame me as an obstacle to be managed, to erase my contribution and diminish my future. They were about to discover just how profoundly they had miscalculated. Margaret Winters had chosen the meeting location deliberately, a private dining room at the Botanic Gardens, removed from downtown Denver's business district where we might be recognized together. As I entered, she rose to greet me, her handshake firm despite the visible effects of her own cancer journey. Her cropped silver hair framed a face that had weathered both corporate boardrooms and chemotherapy wards with equal determination. "You look better than when I saw you at the oncology center last month," she noted, gesturing for me to sit. No platitudes, no uncomfortable expressions of sympathy, just straightforward acknowledgement between survivors. "Final round of treatment. Completed last week," I replied, settling into the chair across from her. "Scan results promising." "Good. Clear thinking is essential for what we're discussing today." She signaled discreetly to the server, who poured water and then disappeared, closing the door behind him. Margaret didn't waste time on small talk. "I've been watching Mitchell Consulting's situation with particular interest, not just because of our personal connection, but because it represents a pattern I've seen repeatedly: promising companies undermined by leadership more interested in personal gain than sustainable growth." "You mentioned acquisition possibilities in your email," I said, cutting to the heart of the matter. She nodded, opening a slim leather portfolio. "Phoenix Partners specializes in identifying businesses with strong fundamentals but compromised management. We don't engage in hostile takeovers for dismantling. We rehabilitate companies that deserve better leadership than they currently have." "And you think Mitchell qualifies?" "I know it does." She slid several documents across the table. "We've done our homework. Your firm's core methodology is sound. Your client retention rates were exceptional until recent. Disruptions. Your team includes several top-tier professionals who remain despite the current turbulence. The foundation is solid." I scanned the analysis she'd provided, impressed by its thoroughness. Their team had compiled data not just on Mitchell's published financials, but on client satisfaction metrics, industry reputation assessments, and competitive positioning. "All of this would be interesting in normal circumstances," I said. "But James and Rachel have no intention of selling. They're consolidating control, not relinquishing it." Margaret smiled slightly. "People rarely plan to sell until staying becomes untenable. That's where strategy comes in." She leaned forward. "Sarah, what's your ultimate goal here? Financial compensation? Professional vindication? Justice?" The question made me pause. I'd been so focused on fighting back that I hadn't fully articulated what victory would actually look like. "All of those things matter," I admitted, "but mostly I want to protect what we built, what I built. The approach to consulting that prioritizes sustainable solutions over quick profits. The company culture that values ethics and long-term thinking. I can't bear watching James and Rachel dismantle it for short-term gain." Margaret nodded, seeming satisfied with my answer. "Then acquisition isn't just possible. It's the ideal solution. You don't just want compensation for what's been taken. You want restoration of what's been damaged." "But how?" I asked. "James controls majority voting shares now that we're divorced. He would never voluntarily sell, especially to me." "Directly to you?" "No," Margaret agreed. "But to Phoenix Partners? Under the right circumstances, absolutely." She outlined a strategy so elegant in its conception that I found myself leaning forward, fully engaged for the first time in months. Phoenix would create an acquisition vehicle specifically for this purpose, a new entity with me as a significant, but not majority stakeholder, keeping my involvement carefully obscured initially. They would approach Mitchell Consulting through intermediaries, positioning the offer as a liquidity opportunity for James rather than a hostile takeover. "Meanwhile," Margaret continued, "your legal pressure continues. Every deposition, every document request, every motion increases their discomfort. The combination of legal jeopardy and financial temptation can be remarkably effective. And if they still refuse to sell? Then we move to phase 2, leveraging debt." Her expression turned more serious. From our analysis, Mitchell has taken on significant new obligations financing their expansion and establishing Summit. Their cash flow is vulnerable, especially with the client defections you've documented. If we can acquire their debt instruments, you gain influence without acquiring equity, I finished, the strategy becoming clear. You could potentially force a reorganization if they default. Precisely. But for this to work, we need two things from you. First, your insider knowledge of the company's structure, vulnerabilities, and potential. And second, your commitment to the long game. This won't resolve overnight. The long game. 6 months ago, I wasn't certain I would have a long-term future at all. Now I was being asked to commit to a strategy that might take months or even years to fully execute. I'm not going anywhere, I said firmly. Cancer has a way of clarifying priorities. This company, restoring it, reclaiming it, that's worth however long it takes. Margaret studied me for a moment, then nodded once, decisively. Good. Then let's talk specifics. By the time our lunch concluded 3 hours later, we had outlined a comprehensive campaign with 3 parallel tracks: legal pressure through Diane, financial strategy through Phoenix Partners, and reputation, management to counter James's narrative control. The plan wouldn't be quick or easy. It would require patience, strategic thinking, and careful coordination among various allies. But for the first time since my diagnosis, I felt something beyond determination. I felt genuine hope. Not just that I would survive, but that I would reclaim and rebuild what mattered most. As Margaret and I parted ways, she clasped my hand briefly. When I finished treatment last year, my oncologist told me something I've carried with me. Surviving is the first victory. What you do with the life you fought for, that's the legacy. I think you're well on your way to a remarkable legacy, Sarah. I left our meeting with renewed purpose and a clear roadmap for the path ahead. The battle had evolved from a defensive struggle against erasure to a proactive campaign for restoration. The next phase began immediately. While Diane maintained legal pressure through our ongoing lawsuit, I focused on 2 critical initiatives: gathering the detailed company information Phoenix Partners needed for their acquisition strategy, and quietly rebuilding relationships with key clients and industry contacts. Kevin proved invaluable for the first task. Despite the increasingly hostile environment at Mitchell, he maintained his position as research director, documenting the company's shifting client relationships and financial commitments. His weekly updates, delivered through secured channels, Diane had established, provided crucial intelligence on Mitchell's growing vulnerabilities. They're expanding too rapidly, he reported during one update. 3 new senior consultants hired from competitors with guaranteed salaries regardless of performance. The new downtown office space costs nearly triple our previous lease. And they've committed to a proprietary software platform that requires significant upfront investment. All funded through new debt? I asked. Exactly. James is banking on the Summit client transitions, providing enough cash flow to cover these commitments. But the transitions are happening slower than projected, and some key accounts are hesitating. This information went directly to Margaret's team at Phoenix, who were quietly mapping Mitchell's debt structure and identifying potential entry points for acquisition. Meanwhile, I focused on rebuilding my professional network, not just for support in the current conflict, but to ensure Mitchell's viability after we reclaimed it. David Mercer remained a steadfast ally, introducing me to other long-standing clients who had concerns about the company's direction under James and Rachel's leadership. These conversations required delicate navigation. I couldn't explicitly request they withhold business, which could constitute tortious interference, but I could honestly answer their questions about the company's situation and my ongoing involvement. The uncertainty is the problem, Carolyn Hurst, CEO of a regional healthcare provider and 5-year Mitchell client, told me during one such discussion. We've built our relationship with your firm based on continuity and trust. The conflicting messages about leadership and direction make it difficult to commit to renewed engagements. These client hesitations created exactly the financial pressure our strategy required. Without directly orchestrating it, I was witnessing the natural consequences of James and Rachel's mismanagement. Clients valued stability and integrity, precisely what they had undermined. Lisa continued providing critical insights from within the company, though her position grew increasingly precarious as James's paranoia intensified. "They're conducting weekly loyalty reviews now," she reported during a secure call. "Employee communications are being monitored. 3 people from the research team were let go yesterday. All had expressed concerns about the summit transition strategy." "Are you safe?" I asked, worried about her vulnerability. "For now. I'm playing the confused middle manager role, just trying to keep my department functioning amid the chaos. But eventually, they'll realize I'm not fully on board with the new regime." Her assessment proved prophetic. 2 weeks later, she called from a coffee shop near the office, voice tight with controlled emotion. "It's happening. HR called me in this morning for a performance review. They've manufactured documentation claiming my department has missed targets that don't even exist in our actual goals. They're building a case for termination." I felt a stab of guilt. Lisa was risking her livelihood to support our cause. "I'm so sorry." "Don't," she interrupted firmly. "This isn't your fault. I've watched what they're doing to this company, to the culture we built, to the principles we operated on. I would have resigned anyway. At least this way, I'm helping set things right." 3 days later, Lisa was indeed terminated, ostensibly for performance issues, but transparently for insufficient loyalty to the new regime. She wasn't the only one. In what employees began calling the Thursday Purge, 5 long-term staff members were dismissed in a single day, all with similarly thin justifications. These firings, intended to consolidate control, instead accelerated the company's destabilization. Remaining employees, witnessing the arbitrary removal of respected colleagues, began updating their resumes and quietly reaching out to competitors. Key institutional knowledge walked out the door with each terminated employee. One unexpected consequence of the purge was the formation of what Lisa half-jokingly called the Mitchell Alumni Resistance, a growing network of former employees who remained in contact, sharing information and supporting each other's job searches. This network became another valuable source of intelligence about the company's internal operations. "They're not just firing people," reported Michael, a former senior consultant who had resigned in protest after the purge. "They're rewriting processes, eliminating the ethical review standards for potential clients, cutting corners on the diagnostic phase of engagements. It's becoming a completely different company." This information reinforced the urgency of our reclamation effort. It wasn't just about my personal stake anymore. It was about preserving a business approach that prioritized long-term value over quick profits, that measured success by client outcomes rather than billable hours. While our coalition of current and former employees, concerned clients, and strategic investors continued growing, James and Rachel remained fixated on more direct threats. Their attorneys filed increasingly desperate motions in our ongoing legal case, seeking to limit discovery and prevent depositions. They intensified their public relations campaign, with James giving interviews portraying himself as the visionary leader guiding Mitchell Consulting through necessary evolution. Most revealing was their attempt to accelerate client transitions to Summit, offering steep discounts and extended payment terms to encourage immediate switches, tactics that indicated growing cash flow concerns. "They're feeling the pressure," Diane observed during one of our strategy sessions, now held in Margaret's offices for security. "Their legal filings are becoming less measured, more reactionary. They know the depositions would be devastating, especially if Rachel has to testify under oath about when their relationship began and how client transitions were actually decided." The breakthrough came through an unexpected channel. Zoe, Rachel's increasingly disillusioned assistant, contacted me through our secure communication line. Her message marked urgent. "Summit is in trouble," she wrote. "Two major clients have delayed payment, citing service delivery concerns. The new downtown lease requires a significant payment next week. James had a closed-door meeting with their bank yesterday. Lots of raised voices. Something big is happening." Sam confirmed this development through his financial industry contacts. Mitchell's credit line has reached its limit. They've requested an emergency extension, but were denied based on concerning cash flow projections. They're exploring alternative financing options, but at significantly less favorable terms. This was the vulnerability Phoenix Partners had been waiting for. Margaret's team moved quickly, approaching the bank holding Mitchell's primary business, loans through specialized intermediaries. Within days, they had opened negotiations to purchase the debt instruments, positioning themselves as risk management specialists rather than revealing the connection to me. Meanwhile, Lisa, now freed from employment constraints, joined our strategy team officially. Her first-hand knowledge of Mitchell's operations and personnel proved invaluable as we refined our approach. "The company's in worse shape than we initially realized," she explained, reviewing the latest internal reports shared by our remaining allies. Beyond the financial strain, they're facing a talent exodus. 3 senior consultants have accepted offers from competitors. Project delivery is suffering from understaffing and rushed methodology. Client complaints have increased 40% quarter over quarter. "They're imploding," Kevin added during a weekend strategy session at Diane's office. "The aggressive expansion, compressed timelines, ethical corners being cut, it's not sustainable. Even without our efforts, they'd be facing serious challenges." "Which creates both opportunity and risk for us," Margaret noted. "An acquisition target losing value rapidly doesn't serve our purposes. We need to move decisively while there's still something worth salvaging." The timing proved critical. 2 days later, our sources reported that James had begun discreet conversations with a national consulting firm about potentially selling Mitchell outright, a desperate move indicating just how precarious their position had become. "This changes everything," Margaret said when I called to inform her. "If James is already considering selling, our approach needs adjustment. Instead of creating pressure that might push him toward outside buyers, we need to position Phoenix as the most appealing option." The strategy pivoted accordingly. Phoenix Partners, through their intermediaries, accelerated negotiations for Mitchell's debt while simultaneously preparing a direct acquisition offer. Meanwhile, I reached out to David Mercer and other key clients who had remained with Mitchell, despite concerns, asking them to temporarily delay any major new engagements. "I can't ask you to withdraw business," I explained carefully to David. "But if you're planning significant new projects in the coming month, I would appreciate your patience before making commitments. The company's situation may be clarified very soon." He understood immediately. "We've been holding off anyway, given the uncertainty. I can certainly continue that position for a few more weeks." This coordinated pause in new business, combined with existing cash flow challenges, created precisely the pressure point we needed. Mitchell's financial position went from concerning to critical in a matter of days. The culmination came more suddenly than any of us had anticipated. On a Tuesday morning, Phoenix Partners received notification that their offer to purchase Mitchell's debt had been accepted by the bank, giving them significant leverage over the company's financial future. That same afternoon, James's attorney contacted Diane requesting an emergency meeting to discuss potential global resolution of outstanding matters. "They know they're cornered," Diane said when she called to inform me. "The question is whether they realize who's actually behind the pressure." The meeting was scheduled for the following day at Diane's office. I debated whether to attend personally or allow her to represent me, ultimately deciding my presence was essential. This wasn't just a legal negotiation, it was the culmination of a personal and professional battle for restoration. I arrived early, deliberately choosing a seat that would allow me to observe James and Rachel's expressions when they entered. My appearance had changed significantly since our last encounter. My hair was growing back, I'd regained weight, and most importantly, the fog of treatment had lifted from my eyes. The woman who waited for them was not the shell-shocked patient they had attempted to erase, but the strategic business leader I had always been. When they entered, the shift in power dynamics was immediately apparent. James looked haggard, the confident posture replaced by tense shoulders and darting eyes. Rachel maintained her polished exterior, but her tight grip on her portfolio betrayed her anxiety. "Thank you for meeting on short notice," James's attorney began, his usual aggressive tone notably subdued. "My clients believe there may be an opportunity for mutually beneficial resolution of our ongoing disputes." Diane raised an eyebrow. "We're certainly open to discussion. What specifically are you proposing?" James cleared his throat. "The business landscape has evolved since our last conversations. We've been approached with acquisition interest that could provide liquidity for all stakeholders. In light of this development, we'd like to resolve outstanding claims to facilitate a clean transaction." "Interesting timing," I noted, meeting his gaze directly. "Your position has shifted considerably from our last discussion." "Market realities require adaptability," he replied stiffly. "Indeed they do. And what exactly are you offering in this newfound spirit of resolution?" His attorney outlined the proposal, a settlement significantly higher than their previous offers, acknowledgement of my co-founder status in any public announcements about the acquisition, and mutual non-disparagement agreements. In exchange, he continued, all litigation would be dismissed with prejudice, and Ms. Mitchell would provide necessary approvals for the pending acquisition offer. "Which is from whom exactly?" Diane asked, though we already knew the answer. "A private investment group called Phoenix Partners," Rachel interjected, clearly eager to demonstrate her involvement in the process. "They've expressed interest in acquiring Mitchell Consulting as a going concern, maintaining its core business while providing capital for strategic initiatives." I kept my expression neutral despite the satisfaction coursing through me. "And summit strategies? Is that included in the proposed transaction?" A flicker of discomfort crossed James's face. Summit would be folded back into Mitchell as part of pre-acquisition restructuring. The potential buyers have made that a condition of their offer. Of course they had. Margaret's team had structured the deal precisely to ensure all diverted assets and opportunities would be recaptured before acquisition. "This proposal represents a significant improvement over previous offers," Diane acknowledged. "However, we have concerns about several aspects, particularly the timing and valuation. We'll need to review the full details of the proposed acquisition to ensure Ms. Mitchell's interests are adequately protected." "Time is somewhat limited," James pressed. "Phoenix has indicated their offer is contingent on resolving outstanding litigation promptly." "Nevertheless, proper due diligence is essential," I replied calmly. "We'll need complete documentation on the proposed transaction, including Phoenix's post-acquisition plans for the company." The negotiation continued for another hour, with James and Rachel growing increasingly impatient as we methodically addressed each aspect of their proposal. What they didn't realize was that our careful examination wasn't about extracting better terms. It was about maintaining the appearance of arm's-length negotiations while the acquisition strategy we had orchestrated played out. As the meeting concluded, James attempted one final appeal. "Sarah," he said, using my first name for the first time in the conversation. "This really is the best outcome for everyone. The company continues under new ownership. You receive fair compensation and recognition. We all move forward with our respective lives." I regarded him thoughtfully, struck by how completely he had missed the point of my resistance all along. Even now, he saw this as merely a financial transaction, a division of assets between divorced spouses. rather than a fundamental matter of justice and restoration. I appreciate your concern for optimal outcomes, I replied. I'll review the acquisition documentation closely before making any decisions. Outside in the hallway after they'd departed, Diane turned to me with a slight smile. They have absolutely no idea you're involved with Phoenix, do they? Not the slightest inkling, I confirmed. James is so convinced of his own narrative that I'm just a vindictive ex-wife seeking settlement money that he can't conceive of me orchestrating something this comprehensive. When will you tell them? I considered the question. Not until the acquisition is completed. This isn't about personal vindication anymore. It's about reclaiming and rebuilding the company. The following weeks passed in a carefully choreographed dance of legal negotiations and acquisition proceedings. Phoenix partners conducted their due diligence with thoroughness that provided us valuable additional insights into Mitchell's operations and challenges. James and Rachel, eager to complete the transaction before their financial situation deteriorated further, were unusually cooperative with the process. Our coalition continued to expand and strengthen. Lisa formally joined Phoenix's transition team as an operational consultant, bringing her institutional knowledge of Mitchell's systems and culture. Kevin maintained his position within the company, providing crucial continuity as the acquisition progressed. David Mercer and several other key clients expressed relief when informed confidentially about the pending ownership change, with many indicating willingness to maintain or expand their engagements once the transition was complete. Even former employees who had departed during the turmoil began reaching out, inquiring about potential opportunities once new leadership was in place. The Mitchell alumni resistance was evolving into a potential talent pipeline for the company's restoration. Throughout this intense period, I underwent my final medical evaluations, receiving the news I had fought so hard to hear. No evidence of disease. My oncologist was cautiously optimistic, emphasizing that continued monitoring would be necessary, but that I had responded exceptionally well to treatment. Whatever you're doing beyond the medical regimen, she said during our review. Appointment, keep doing it. Your mental outlook has been a significant factor in your recovery. She wasn't wrong. The fight to reclaim Mitchell had given me purpose during the darkest days of treatment. It had been something to fight for beyond mere survival, a future worth recovering for. As the acquisition moved toward completion, Margaret and I finalized the post-transaction structure. Phoenix Partners would be the majority owner on paper, with me holding a significant minority stake initially. I would return as CEO, with a clear path to increasing my ownership percentage based on the company's performance under my leadership. This arrangement protects both our interests, Margaret explained as we reviewed the final documents. Phoenix secures their investment with majority control, while you have the opportunity to earn back substantial ownership through successful leadership. The company benefits from continuity and restoration of its founding principles. The public announcement was scheduled carefully, timed to coincide with the formal closing of both the acquisition and our legal settlement. The press release was drafted and redrafted multiple times, each word precisely chosen to communicate the transition's significance without explicitly revealing my involvement in orchestrating it. On the evening before the announcement, I sat, alone in my apartment reviewing the journey of the past year. From diagnosis to betrayal to recovery and reclamation, it had been a path I never would have chosen, but that had revealed strengths I hadn't known I possessed. The company I would be rejoining wasn't the same one I had left. It had been damaged by James and Rachel's tenure, with client relationships strained, staff morale diminished, and core methodologies compromised. Rebuilding would require time, patience, and strategic vision. But I wasn't the same either. Cancer and betrayal had burned away any illusions about professional relationships, any hesitation about standing firmly for my values, any reluctance to claim the authority I had earned. I was returning not as James's former partner in need of validation, but as a leader with clear vision and hard-won wisdom. My phone chimed with a text from Lisa. Everything ready for tomorrow. Phoenix legal team has confirmed James and Rachel signed final documents this afternoon. It's really happening. I smiled, feeling a complex mixture of emotions. Satisfaction at the successful execution of our strategy, anticipation of the challenges ahead, and something unexpected, a sense of completion. Not because the work was done, but because a circle had closed. What had been taken through betrayal was being reclaimed through persistence, strategic thinking, and the coalition we had built. Tomorrow would bring the public announcement, carefully, crafted to position the acquisition as a standard private equity transaction. James and Rachel would be described as pursuing other opportunities, their departure framed as a natural evolution rather than the culmination of a carefully orchestrated campaign. My appointment as CEO would be announced separately, a week later, allowing the initial transaction to complete cleanly before introducing what would inevitably be seen as a dramatic reversal. The press release would highlight my role as co-founder, returning to lead the company's renewed commitment to its core values and methodologies. What wouldn't be mentioned was Phoenix Partners' unusual ownership structure giving me accelerated equity increases based on performance, or the carefully negotiated non-compete agreements preventing James and Rachel from establishing competing consultancies for 5 years. Those details would remain private, known only to those who had helped orchestrate this remarkable reclamation. As I prepared for bed, I found myself thinking not about James or Rachel, or even the company itself, but about the coalition that had made this outcome possible. Lisa's principled stand despite personal risk, Kevin's quiet persistence in documenting the truth, David Mercer's loyalty to our business approach rather than to individuals, Margaret's strategic vision and willingness to create unconventional solutions. Alone, none of us could have achieved this outcome. Together, we had not only stopped the dismantling of something valuable but created the foundation for something potentially better. The company that would emerge from this transition would carry forward the best of its original vision, while incorporating hard-won lessons about resilience, integrity, and the power of principled collaboration. Tomorrow would mark a new beginning, not just for Mitchell Consulting, but for all of us who had fought to reclaim and restore it. The cancer that had nearly taken my life had changed me profoundly, as had the betrayal that followed. But what had emerged from those twin crucibles wasn't bitterness or defeat, but something unexpected and powerful. A leader who understood that the most meaningful victories aren't achieved alone, but through building genuine coalitions based on shared values and mutual respect. As I drifted toward sleep, I found myself oddly grateful, not for the trials themselves, which had been genuinely harrowing, but for the clarity they had brought. Sometimes you have to lose everything to discover what truly matters. Sometimes you have to face erasure to find your most authentic voice. And sometimes the path to reclamation leads through unexpected alliances with people who recognize the value of what you're fighting to restore. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.